Shalom, y'all. Welcome to Wednesday night. I'm glad you're all here with me. I'd be awful lonely without you. But anyway, tonight we're going to begin. This is only part one. And really the focus of tonight is on energy. Eventually we'll get into frequency and we'll get into vibrations. But right now I just want to focus on energy. But to do that, I want to go back to the very beginning, and I want to go back to the book of Genesis, and I want to go back to my favorite chapter, and that's Genesis chapter 1. So if you'll go back with me, we're not going to read the whole chapter. I just want to read the first day because there's enough anomalies really in Genesis chapter 1 that you can spend a long time here. In fact, I've spent a long time there. In fact, I could go several days if you wanted. But anyway, back to verse 1. It begins by saying, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated it between the light and the darkness. God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. So what was created on that first day? What was created on that first day? The answer is light. What about water? He doesn't mention water. Was water already there before the universe was created? Do you see where the anomalies are starting to come from? Now, he created light on the first day, but there's a problem. What did he create on the fourth day? Sun, moon, stars, everything that illuminated. So where did the light come from? Where did the light come from? That's the conundrum. I'm trying to make this a little bit easier, so I created for you a, whoops, it's running itself. I need to go back one. Technology. Let me close down and start over again. Well, maybe not. I'm not used to having to do this. But anyway, so let's try it again. And I try not to touch a screen. What has it got to do with that? Well, you're seeing the whole show, so if you see anything you like, just let me know. Otherwise, we're going to try to go back to the very beginning again. Like I said, my computer wants to make its own decisions, and I can't stop it. Time out for a second. Y'all talk to each other while I get this straightened out, I hope.
Okay, well, I'll fill in a blank here. I've noticed too that in Genesis it says that the heavens and the earth. Earth, the word they use there is eretz, but when it comes to dry land, it uses a different word. I don't know if you've ever noticed that or not. I think the word is yebes or something to that effect.
Correct. Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. Even from the very beginning, we have a problem, right?
Right.
The problem starts early on, and it doesn't get any better than this. So as I'm going through it from the beginning, all right. As I'm looking at this whole thing, let's start from the very beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens, plural. Now, there's a question depending on what religious system you follow, anywhere from 1 to 10. In Hindu, there's 10. In Hebrew, there's 7. Normally, we think in terms of 1 or 2 if we decide to call the heavens everything that's above the atmosphere, and then beyond that being the second one. So all of this is there. In the beginning, God created this. Now, the question then becomes, how did he create it? And that's where we end up running into a problem that started a long time ago. The problem started when we tried to define what created was. How does one define creation? We say creation is making of something out of nothing. Science goes back and looks at this very same thing that religion looks at, and spiritual ideas are understood by that. But again, as we're looking at this whole concept, the Greeks really didn't have what you would call science. Neither did the Egyptians, who were long before the Jews. What they had was a philosophy. That's what they called science. Later, the Hebrews called science Chokmah Yavan, or Greek wisdom. That's what they began to call it. Even their understanding of science has changed over the centuries. And that's one of the things that we have to understand. We have to understand also that we can't even come to an agreement about how old the earth is or how old creation is. If you're following modern understanding, if you follow the creation theory, most people say that the earth is somewhere around 5,800 years old, not quite 6,000. Isaac Luria, Menachem Schneerson, all of the great rabbis at one point or another have always thought and held that there are 6 days of creation and the seventh was a day of rest. And each day was a day, yom meaning a day. But science, when they go back and we begin to test for it, by testing, we're talking about doing carbon-14. And for extraterrestrial space, for the heavens, one has to use something entirely different because you can't use a carbon test to figure it out. So they use what's called light, a Doppler light, which measures distance between objects and tells you that when you go a distance, you're talking about time at the same point. So there's a difference. And so science says it's somewhere around 14 billion years old. Quite a difference between the two. Now, scientific dating on the Earth says that the Earth is only 13 billion years old. That there was this period in time where the Earth did not exist. Almost a billion years to where we are today. But at the same point in time, since there is no biblical dating, some of the rabbis began to look at it and they began to change their understanding. Sefer HaTumanah, which is called the Book of the Figure, was written by Nahuna ben Kanai. It was the idea of Sabbath cycles, as he understood it. He says that there were actually 7 cycles of 7,000-year periods. Right now, we're only at 42,000. We haven't reached the final cycle. That's how he have identified it. But he wasn't the only one who came up with something different. Midrash Rabbah said that this teaches us that there was order of time before this age, before this 6,000-year period. There's always been an order of time. Time and space began that first moment. That was understood. But at the same point in time, there's a book called Meraket Elokit, which says that this teaches that there were orders of time before this, and there were 974 generations before this, before Adam was created. 974 generations. Well, if you go back and look at time that way, then what we're looking at is we've reached the 1,000th generation with the birth of Moses. Moses is the 26th generation from Adam. So in terms of understanding, we've reached the last of the cycle as they would understand it. Now, Gerald Schroeder, who is a Jew and um, he deals in astrophysics. He's since passed away. Agreed with a rabbi called Rabbi Yitzhak of Akko. Now, he was born in the 12th century. And he said, according to Psalms, we understand that a day is 1,000 years to God. So there's a divine day. He said, if there's a divine day, and if we're correct in assuming that Ben Kahana happened to understand it correctly, so then we have now a period of time of 42,000 times the number of days in a year, which in times would be 36. So we now have 400 or 42,000 plus 365,000, which is a divine year, making a total of 15,340,000 or 40,500,000. That both Schroeder and Akko agree. They believe that the earth is this old, and that's how they've identified it. That's how they keep track of it. Now, again, what is science? Science today is defined as a systematic system that builds and organizes knowledge and sets of knowledge produced by a system. The ancient Greeks referred to it as philosophy. Egypt and the Hebrews referred to it as wisdom. So if we go back to that first chapter of Genesis and we go back to the understanding of light, just go back for a second. If the luminaries didn't appear until the fourth day, what light was formed on the first day? What was it called? And first off, we have to also understand it's called the first day. Not as it's actually called day one, not the first day. If you go back and read that scripture again in verse 5. So we have a difference of opinion because the second day is called the second day and the third day is called the third day. But why did they call the first day one day or day one? The understanding is what we're going to look at is several things. Again, it's an anomaly. It's not something that's easily defined. But using your sanctified imagination, I think you can understand that actually the first day's light was aha. Aha. It was wisdom, Chokmah. That is what the Jews and the Egyptians understood, that the first day was all about wisdom. Now, day one then, or the first day isn't true, it's day one or one day, indicates that there was something before this, which goes back to understanding that there were 974 generations, which helps us to explain all the fossil remains that predate a 6,000-year period. The dinosaurs and all of the other things just don't fit into the 6,000 years. Noah's Ark was not big enough to carry a Tyrannosaurus and a Brontosaurus and all of the other sauruses. So we're not looking at something that happened in a recent past, but something that was more distant. We also have the idea of trilobites, and we have the idea of the first fish coming out of the water, all kinds of things that are happening. All of that tells us something different. Now, the light was created on day one, and on day 4, we find out that it's different. So again, science is ancient, but it's contemporary science. It's modern science that we tend to follow. Modern science is deductive. We have a beginning and we deduce till we reach the end. Chokmah, wisdom, deals with inductive. We start with the whole and we work our way back and see what's going on. That's the difference between wisdom and science. Now we know on the second day, God separated the heavens from the heavens above from the heavens below. In separating the heavens above from the heavens below, what do we have? We actually have, if what we're talking about is consciousness, if that's what the idea was on that first day, we separated wisdom. Because you see, water in time in Hebrew time, represents wisdom. It flows. Well, this is a separation. So here we have earthly wisdom. Here we have heavenly wisdom. And right now they are separated. There is no justification between one and the other. We're working on it, but at this point in time, there is none. So we had in the first day, remember, we had water, and the Spirit of God was moving upon water, but yet it didn't say that water was created. So the water must have existed before in another pre-world. The anomaly of light. The Midrash teaches that this light was so bright the man could see from one end of the universe to the other. Now, you and I both know, even with the most powerful telescope we have now, we still can't see the end of the universe. We can't see any of its edges. We just know that the universe is expanding. Now, when Adam apparently saw the end of the universe, what was he looking at? In his mind, where is the universe going? What's the end? Now, you don't have to be a Torah scholar or a rocket scientist to realize that all of this is an anomaly. The sages say that he hid away that light for the wise, to ultimately who would be consciously aware of science and wisdom. Because you see, we're only now beginning to reach the edges of the universe, and we're still not there. Although now science is saying that maybe what we think is going to be the edge of the universe won't be. That there are galaxies out there that were supposedly created before what we call the Big Bang. You know, God realized that Adam would someday understand and reach the ultimate awareness. The only problem was he disrupted that by eating from the tree of knowledge before he sampled life. And because of that, creation has gone through cycles of destruction. And evidently, before our Adam, that same possibility continued from there. Why does God call it the first day? Because it's only this 6,000-year cycle. It's only now that is the first day. One thing that all cultures seem to have in common is called the flower of creation. Now, the flower of creation early in the world was exposed to this flower of creation. I don't know how it happened, but I listed for you all of the countries in which you can find in their artifacts. All of these places, all of them, have the flower of creation embedded somewhere in some of their artifacts. If you go to Israel and you go to Masada, go up onto Masada, you will actually find the flower of creation on the walls. If you go to the synagogues in Galilee, you'll find the flower of life embedded in those ancient synagogues. The flower of life existed in all of these cultures. We talked about Egypt, and I talked to you about the Temple of Osiris. That was one of those oldest examples of that, because remember, Masada and the idea of the synagogues of the northern part of Israel are not nearly as old as the Temple of Osiris. But even older than that, some say, is the palace in Assyria. China has it even older places that are actually identified. But when you get to China, when you get to Egypt, when you go to some of these other places like Japan and the Shinto shrines, where I was there and saw them, didn't understand what I was looking at the time, but I saw them in the Shinto shrines. Shintos they do not believe in death. Well, they believe death, but they don't believe in life after death. So they simply have created this flower. We bloom and then we die. That's the flower of life there. They began to change their understanding with Buddha coming. And then the flower grew, it died and regrew, regenerated. India the same way, Turkey the same way, Italy the same way. All of these countries, all of these places, all had the flower of life. Everyone recognized it for what it was. Now, if we follow the Big Bang Theory and the flower of life, we're going to run into four concepts that we have to deal with. First is the cataclysm. I listed for you called the flower of life is one's pieces. Germ of life was the very beginning. I don't know if you can really see it, but I have a circle with a red dot in the center of the circle. The red dot represents the germ of the idea. That is the very beginning of the whole process. Around it, surrounding it, is what we call Zim-Zoom. We know, according to the laws of science, no two things can occupy the same space at the same time. So in order for God to create the universe that we're now living in, God had to Zim-Zoom. He had to inhale and create a space for the universe. Because other than God, the universe had nothing. There's nothing but God. So he excluded himself, created the circle, or created what we would call the area which the whole thing would happen. And the germ in the center is very, very tiny. Not as tiny as a single atom, but according to science, that's what happened. From a single atom, the bang exploded. Everything began to move out from there. But like every kind of organism, they go from a single cell to multiple cells. And so there's what's called cell division, which is meiosis. This is the idea of two cells. And I want you to notice, if you look at the two cells, the center section. The center section is important because it's to remind us of something very, very hidden. The womb. Birth takes place from the womb. That's the beginning. The two circles represent the circle of male and the circle of female. And the creation comes from that. Now that begins the process, but they have to continue to divide. And so as they divide, they create what we would call the seed. And if you look at what we're looking at, that's the seed as they would draw it. That will eventually become the flower of life. I want you to notice first off, and this is besides the flower that you create in the center, there's 7 circles. And I'll get back to it again, but it's one circle surrounded by 6 circles, surrounded by another 6 circles, surrounded by another 6 circles. Totally, there are 19 circles involved. In the Hebrew language, the idea of this is the letter Kuf. Kuf is represented by the number 100. 100 is the perfect number. So we begin with something that it is going to lead us from 1 to 100. From beginning singly all the way to completeness at some point. Now, if we look at this, at the circle called the philosophy or the flower of life, you begin to get the idea of all of these flowers created by the creation of each and every circle. Each and every circle is added to until finally we have the completion of the flower of life. Aristotle really is the first one that we can understand who started this. Aristotle started by saying, only those who have mastered geometry may pass through this portal. In other words, you had to know geometry in order to understand the flower of life, in order to understand creation. Aristotle was the first one to express it. Not that it hadn't been expressed before, but it never found in written language. This is the first time. From this, Plato picked up on it and he began to talk about what's called sacred geometry. There'll be 5 sacred solid objects that all can be found within this flower of life. Also, he began to look at it and he also came up with, or later would come up with Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem. Also, that would come from this would be the idea of pi. All of that goes back to geometry. All of it goes back to the original portal, where we're going. I left you a little drawing, and the drawing comes from, if you can read the bottom, comes from Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo's art draws off of the flower of life. He uses the mathematics of that flower in his art. He uses it in his regular scale drawings as he begins to work. This becomes an obsession with him. He obsesses over this idea, never coming to a conclusion, but he understands it's important. The next character I've talked about before is the Vilna Gaon. In the Vilna's understanding, you must know science. Now, you need to know Torah, obviously. He began with that. He said you must know science and you also must know mathematics. And so as he's working, he understands that Torah is the most important. So he spends his entire life studying Torah. But you and I both know that there's times when you cannot study Torah, such as when you use the restroom. Those times, Vilna Gaon used to write a book of geometry. He added to this idea of mathematics. He, again, was another one who worked on the idea of the flower. He toiled over it. Another one that I've mentioned several times is Nikola Tesla. Nikola came with the idea that creation brought with us energy, vibration, and frequency. And from that, he began to develop his understanding of alternating current, understandings of all kinds of things that the earth is capable of doing for us that doesn't require us to build windmills, doesn't require us to do a lot of power lines or any of the other things. But all of that process came out of his understandings of geometry and the flower of life. This was where he was going. Now, within that flower of life, then, we're going to find that there's lots of things that we don't see, but we should begin to see. For example, it should not be surprising that the flower of life contains within it at least 15 symmetrical associations with creation. I talked about the viscous Pisces. That's the 2 circles together with the womb in the middle. Triquetra is triangular motif. This is a catetra. It's interlaced loops. Again, if you go back to the flower of life, you see these loops that have been created. We talked about the seed of life. The fruit of life is something we'll get into later. Another one is called the Metatron. The Metatron, I can't see it here because it's hidden behind my list of people, but as you're looking at it, it contains the various shapes of the universe. And by that, I mean 3-dimensional shapes. So it's much more difficult or much more, well, it just is. The next one is the 5 platonic solids. And I gave you a colorful picture down at the bottom. Those are the 5 solids that Plato identified that can all be found within the flower of life. Now, understand the flower of life is drawn for us in 2 dimensions. These 5 solids are 3-dimensional. It was Tesla who began to say, when we look at this, Plato had figured it out before maybe, had understood that we should look at the flower of life as a 3-dimensional object and not a 2-dimensional object. We've been using the wrong kind of science and trying to figure out what's going on. In the Far East, the 7 chakras began to show up. That's the energy points within a man. There were 7 of them within each man. And those 7 chakras can be found within this. And I'll show you that later on. And finally, well, not finally, we have the tree of life. Now, the tree of life, I'll show you later, is the 10 Sephirot. It's how we describe man and how we understand our relationship, our resemblance to God. The final one is called a labyrinth. The labyrinth is an idea of the fact that we walk through a maze now. We haven't reached the end of it, but we will. And that's the important thing, that we will get there. Okay, come on. Here we go again. 19 circles, flower of life. Now, if you take 19, again, in Hebrew, we don't like, in a gematria, we do not like a number greater than 9. Tesla said that when we look at numbers, we should see 3s, 6s, and 9s. And he began to go through it. In the Hindu culture, in the Chinese culture, all of these other cultures, again, do the same thing. So if you take 19, you're technically adding 1 and 9, which gives you 10. That's still not down to less than. So again, you take it again, adding 0 and 1 together, you get the number 1. In numerological understanding, it represents new possibilities. It represents movement. It represents change. It represents balance. It represents creativity, intent, independence, and consciousness. All of those are found in the multiple cultures. They all have arrived at the same thing. How did they arrive at this? We don't have any real understanding. But if you begin to look on the right-hand side, notice what you're looking at. Notice how we get the arcs, seeds. Notice the Jewish star, although it's not a Jewish star, and that's another lesson in and of itself. If we look at the egg of life, the egg of life is basically the reproduction of single cells, dividing and dividing and dividing. If you go to your spine and you go to the bottom of your spine, that egg of life is what you're going to find. The fruit of life, there's the fruit of life for you. The Metatrome cube, that's all 5 of the solid forms within that life. The Merkaba, again, another one of those transhedrons. Also, that can go back to the book of Ezekiel in the first chapter. We have the basic solids. Down at the bottom, here's the chakra. The middle one is the labyrinth. In other words, we have a starting point in the center. We followed it through to the very end. We're not there yet. Here's the Kabbalah, the tree of life, as Kabbalah would have it. So you have an inner set of 1. The second set is 6. The next set is 6. And the next set is 6 also, making a total of 19. But if we look at the very first set of 6 and the center, if you go to the egg of life, it's probably the easiest to see it. You notice that there are 7 of them together. According to the Hebrew understanding, the 6 outer represent the first 6 days of creation. The 7th one represents God and the Sabbath. Oops, now we got all the way back to the beginning. How did I get there from here? There I am. I guess I went through my slides before I went through my slides. Like I said, I had this problem when I was trying to write my lesson because the lesson wasn't going right. But let me try to end my segment and redo it later next week, give you more information. The understanding I want us to get is the fact that God in his creation did not tell us everything. There are anomalies all through that first chapter. Every place we look, we're going to find something's wrong. If we look at the 5th day and the understanding of what happened on the 5th day, we begin to see the fact that God began to create animals. On the 6th day, he was creating plant life. as you're going through those, each and every one of those days, you're going to find something is missing, something that we on earth are going to have to be stewards of. And in the end, all of the circles will eventually come to be one, a singular circle. Yeah, I think I gave you this one and this one. So I guess I've given you all of them. I'm going to quit. I've already made enough mistakes today, so I will come back to you next week with a better understanding, or I'll share with you next week a better understanding. Those who I sent notes to, again, I sent you notes. I send it two ways. I send it first off as a list. In other words, all of the information's there, but the pictures are not, because the pictures require you to use Microsoft Word. And that's what I use in order to create the pictures, import the pictures and put them into the text. So that's what's there. So if you only have the written portion, you're only looking at the top half of the email. If you do have Microsoft Word, go down to the bottom and you will find that I have put it there for you to open up so that you can get all the pictures and read all the text that goes with it. Because there's 11 pages of information when you finally get your way through it. But I'm going to stop now and no longer share and go back to this point. Obviously, people came in when I wasn't looking. Go ahead. Anybody want to talk and ask me questions about what I don't know?